Good morning. I'm Rachel Bleemer, Director of Events for Film Independent. I'm excited to introduce today's Q&A, but before I do that, I need to thank some of our loyal supporters, the HFPA and Vision Media. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest moderator for today, Carlos Aguilar. He will be having a very exciting conversation about the film A Cop Movie. So, Alonso, Carlos, take it from here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Good to see you, Alonso. For those of you joining us and don't know his work, Alonso Ruizpalacios is a director from Mexico with amazing previous films like Güeros and Museo, and now A Cop Movie. And I'm just excited to be here with you this morning, Alonso.
Sí, actuamos los policías. O podemos actuar con un perfil fuerte, un perfil débil. Fingimos dentro de la realidad, no fingimos dentro de la fantasía.
Trying to quit, but I can't as I flick through the gram like I'm staring on the barrel of a gun.
Siento que nadie en su sano juicio quiere ser policía en esta ciudad.
I wanted to start by asking you, what had been your experiences with the Mexican police force that inspired this film? Was there a particular situation that you encounter? I feel like most Mexicans in Mexico City have their own stories with police, and I wonder what was the spark that inspired you to make this film?
I think, like you said, I think everyone in Mexico, in Mexico City, and in all of Mexico has stories with the police and has a very clear opinion about the Mexican police, and it's not a favorable one at all. When I was making this movie, I told my friends that when they asked me, what are you working on? I was like, a movie about the police in Mexico. And they, like, every time the reaction was like, and I kind of wanted to make a movie that went against what was expected of that subject. It didn't make sense to me to make a movie about just denouncing the stuff that we see every day in the newspapers, which is true and it happens. There is, abuse of power. There is a lot of corruption, but I didn't want to just go and make another movie about that. I wanted to understand them. So, I mean, in answer to the question, I do have experiences with the police like every other Mexican. I fortunately I've never, they've never gone beyond the normal encounters of running over a traffic light and having to deal with that and all. But more than that, it was actually the genesis of this project started at the end of the last period, the Peña Nieto presidency, which was catastrophic for Mexico. The corruption levels were like at an all-time high, and me and the two producers of this film, Elena Fortes and Daniela Latorre, who are it's as much their movie as it is mine. The three of us wanted to get together and do, feel useful in some sense, make ourselves feel useful, which, it's an illusion because I don't think cinema is useful at all. But we wanted to at least feel that we were doing something that wasn't just entertainment. And so we got together with the idea of doing a movie about this crisis of corruption and impunity. And when we were looking at ways to tackle this, the thing that we kept coming back to, and the thing that we always ended up talking about most, was the police, the person of the policeman, the character of the policeman. Because I'm a storyteller. Policemen and women have are filled with interesting stories. Their daily lives are not common at all. So that's kind of what drove me to this subject.
Totally. And once you decided, what was the sort of the process of, getting involved with some event like Teresa and Montoya, and sort of like, getting those stories and that first-hand account that, getting the trust perhaps for them to sort of come forward and talk about very difficult things at times?
Well, so once we decided to make a movie about the police, we started interviewing lots of policemen and women, looking for our characters, and we had a lot of interesting options, I have to say. But so one of our advisors, we had lots of talks. So it was a 2-year investigation period before we turned on a camera. Mm-hmm. And in that process, we had some key advisors who are, very top people in public security, in public policy, and they guided us through along the way. And one of them said to us, "You have to meet Teresa." He'd met her in a pilot program that they have for Yale University, where they're trying to create new programs that will reform the police and create a proximity police. And so he knew Teresa from that program, and he said, "You have to meet her. She's incredible. She has some great stories." And we met her. We came to meet her, and it was love at first sight. It was the first story she told me was the what ended up being the opening scene in the movie, that how she helped to deliver a baby. And it was just clear that she had a way of telling things that was so funny as well. And, she's filled with self-deprecating humor and humor about all of it. And at the same time, a huge sadness. And so and she's a great person. So it was a long process of getting to know each other, getting trust, mutual trust, and her desire to tell her story. Like we couldn't do this movie without Teresa's and Montoya's desire to tell their story. But it was a process of several months getting to know each other and trust each other, which I think is a standard process for in documentaries. You have to get involved, you have to be sensitive and open to them as people, and also see where they want to take the movie as well.
Totally. Was it sort of a new territory for you to enter nonfiction documentary in a very unique way? I wonder how you thought of the film, given that the form is very unique. It is, of course, a documentary, but the way you deliver it, I think it plays a little bit with performance and, fiction and sort of the nature of a performance, and, with the sort of the two sides, with the actors and the real sort of events.
Yeah, I think this movie, I was all the time outside my comfort zone. I like to do that generally, like really putting myself in uncomfortable spots, and not knowing where exactly it's gonna lead or how it's gonna end up. And this movie was very much like that. It was a very strange process, also because we decided to keep the original characters' voices. So we did the interviews first, and then we went away and wrote a script. And meanwhile, the actors were in training. So we were doing all sorts of things at different times. It was a very long and strange process. But it was also a very intuitive process. And it was, finding out we were discovering the form as we were making it. We really didn't, I didn't start with any preconceived ideas on how it should end up. It was a very interesting investigative process all the way through, thematically and formally.
Did you always know that you wanted to include the training of the two actors and that sort of like making them part of this story in that way, beyond just performing the characters?
No, I think that's something that came later.
Mhm.
Originally, they were just going to play the characters, but then I thought, well, I mean, I have a weakness for actors. I trained as an actor myself. I'm married to an actress. So I like actors. I end up spending a lot of my time with them. So the acting process has always been fascinating to me. But in this case, I think it was when we found, at some point interviewing Teresa Montoya, the key was they were talking about representation as something that they do, a performance as something that they do every day in it's part of their work. They perform a part, they put on a uniform, and they have to, Monica says it in the film, they're the most vulnerable people playing the part of a strong person with authority. And in reality, in Mexico, I know it's different here in the US. In Mexico, they have zero authority. They are the most vulnerable people, and sometimes even physically. And so they're playing a part. And that key was what kind of opened up this idea that we should also use the actors as sort of the audience's avatars to enter this world of the police forces that is very distant from us on a daily basis.
Totally. And was Monica del Carmen and Raúl Briones always sort of the choices, or were there specific qualities that you saw in them that could sort of like go through this process? I mean, we see Raúl sort of like very conflicted process into getting into character.
Yeah. Well, Raúl, I have a little theater company in Mexico City, and he's in one of the actors in the company. So I've worked with him a lot, and he's very brave and very willful, and so I knew I wanted him. And Monica, he recommended her, actually, because they had done a similar process of immersion in Mexico for a theater project, where they went to live in Tepito, which is one of the roughest neighborhoods in Mexico City. And it was a very beautiful project about kind of knowing that part of the city and kind of bridging that gap between that part of the city and the rest of the city. And so they went to live there for, I think it was 2 months. They spent there working and creating the play with the people from there. And so I knew they were brave people that liked immersion. So they like these very challenging, immersive processes. So I needed brave actors. That was the main thing. But also good actors, because not all brave actors are good. And they're very skilled. Like the way they did the lip sync, it still amazes me when I watch it, how perfectly they got it. There are some scenes that are where the characters have a dialogue where they're not separate, and those, the recordings were like that. They kind of talk on top of each other, they interrupt each other, and the way Raúl and Monica got those rhythms perfectly was really amazing. Like, they worked their asses off on that lip sync stuff. But I think it was beyond that, because the lip sync, that technique has been done before. It's even been done in silly things like Drunk History, that kind of thing. But I think this time they took it beyond just a gag, or they really, for me anyway, they really embody the characters they're playing. and in sync. So it's a very complex thing to do, I think. So yeah, I needed those guys. I can't think of anybody else who would have done it like they did.
Absolutely. There's a scene in the film that I find fascinating, just because in the context of American audiences thinking about the police and how, the vision of the police is very different here in the United States. There's a scene in the film in which a police officer, and I believe it's probably an event in Mexico City, and someone tells him that if he was in the US, he basically would have a lot of power to to deal with the people that disrespecting him. And I found that scene very interesting, because I think it shows sort of the sort of varying ideas that we have about the police in Mexico and in the US. And I wonder if you had any feedback on that, or do you had any thoughts about how this will be perceived outside of Mexico?
Yeah, I'm very interested. So these are going to be the first screenings that we'll have here in the US, and so I'm really curious to see. I think it's probably, we've been told, it's probably the most unpopular thing you can do, to make a movie about proposing empathy towards the police, because I think there's a huge crisis here, and understandably, I don't know all. I don't live here in the States, so I don't know all the nuts and bolts of the crisis between the police and the population here, but it's clear that there's a huge crisis going on right now, and in Mexico as well, but it's of a different nature. That scene actually was, we staged, of course, the part of the actors of these characters pissing on the street, and this guy, but all of that was shot with a hidden camera on a gay pride march, and it was, and the guy who comes and talks to him about him living in Miami, he says, I live in Miami, and you could never get away with that. And he goes, if you do that in Miami, just like that. And that guy is not an actor. That guy was just, he was just looking at the scene, so it's very interesting. It was a gift from the movie gods that happened, that because you see both attitudes there. You see like the onlookers, Mexican people looking at this guy pissing on the street, and the cop doesn't have the authority to tell him to, or to take him away, or whatever has to be done. He doesn't want to get in trouble. There's this whole thing, and this guy who lives in the US says that could never happen in the US. That's amazing. I think it was, and it just happened. It was something that we were rolling. He didn't know it was a movie, because the cameras were very far away. So it's very interesting, and I think it speaks directly to the different types of crises. But I think that the main point is that what is universal is the gap that exists between a group that is meant to look after us and the population that is meant to be looked after. And there's a huge mistrust, and I think that part is universal, and it's a huge problem. And the movie just shines a light on that. It doesn't try to give answers or to tell us, what the right policy is, but I think shining a light on that was crucial.
Totally. Also, you mentioned the corruption and sort of impunity, and I found it very interesting how you handle it with Montoya and Teresa, in the sense that, you don't hide away from, from their own part in committing those acts, but I feel like there's no real judgments, in the sense that I feel like the film explores the system as a whole and what leads people to engage in those things. And I wonder how you were thinking about, these two people that have sort of been, coming forward to be part of your film, and also like treating that darker angle of their job and how they've been themselves involved in this system.
I think it was, we had to get down to that, because it otherwise the film would just be apologetic towards the police, and that would make no sense. You can't, I don't think you can change people's point of view if you don't acknowledge what we all know. And the film starts with that, by the way. It starts with the title sequence is there to kind of show us images of what we all know goes down with the Mexican police. It's all these photographs of police brutality, abuse of power, the cops asleep on their jobs, on their shifts, all that kind of stuff. And so I think we had to touch that with the movie, and Teresa and Montoya knew that we were going to get to that uncomfortable place, and it's always tricky, to get to touch to make the uncomfortable questions, but I think it's necessary, otherwise you can't get the whole picture. And so I take my hat off to them for being brave to talk about it and openly and say, yes, I'm a part of this. I have asked for bribes. I have behaved badly, but there's a reason for it, and this is part of my life. And so it was we couldn't have done it if they hadn't been willing to tell their story.
Totally. I feel like visually the film is really beautiful too. We have perhaps a preconceived notion of what documentaries are. We're used to sort of very cinema verite or more sort of spontaneous sort of filmmaking. But I love the compositions that you use in the stage or the reenactments. With the actors, and I wonder how were you able to bring your visual sense from your fiction work into this format?
Yeah, well, like I say, this movie, all the decisions behind this movie were practical solutions to specific problems.
Right.
So the main problem was, how are we going to portray, how are we going to show all of these things that Teresa and Montoya talk about, all these little acts of corruption, their relationship of mistrust between citizens and police force, the relationship between the higher commands. So all of that, I knew that we were going to have to use fiction, somehow, and so that was the guide. It was a practical solution, basically, to use fiction and to use composition. But I wanted to keep the voices of Teresa and Montoya. I think the movie wouldn't have been the same if we hadn't had their voices. So it's very interesting. I think that we have their voices, but the actors lend their bodies, and so there's a new character that is half the actor and half the policeman, and the compositions, I think, were just, I enjoy the visual aspect of cinema. I always have. It's but it always has to be to follow the concept, and it has to serve the what is being told. And I think that's what we were aiming for here, to have it's quite minimal. There's not too much coverage in all of that, and I think it was very very deliberate and designed so that it, in a way, it's jarring with the spontaneity of the voices. So I found that tension very interesting.
Totally. I wonder, how do you see, this film in relation to your previous films? And I feel like I've always admired how you depict, Mexico City and sort of life there in these different particular vignettes with Güeros and Museo, and now with this. And do you feel it as a departure, or do you see it as an extension that continues the ideas that you like to explore?
I mean, I don't think I've ever made any of these decisions consciously, but I think you end up somehow, obviously, now that I see the finished thing, I think, well, it's another movie about Mexico City in a way, because that's where I'm from. That's where I grew up. That's where I've lived most of my life, and also I think it's a fucking great city that asks nothing of New York or Berlin or any of the great cities. I think Mexico is like up there. And so it's full of interesting stories. So I'm always drawn to Mexico City. I'm constantly fascinated by it. So that was kind of, it's just organic or instinctual that I kind of was drawn to make another movie, another sort of road movie, because this time they're in patrols about Mexico City. But I guess it makes sense, because if you live in Mexico City, you spend a lot of time in your car. That's kind of living in Mexico City is spending a lot of time in some sort of vehicle. And then there's also, I think what it also shares with my other movies, but again, this isn't something pre-planned, is a touch of humor, I guess, a kind of but that responds to actually what Teresa Montoya are like. They're very funny. The way they tell their stories. They have a big sense of humor in this very tragic, or not tragic maybe, but dramatic lives, and that's how they make it through the day with a sense of humor. So I respond to that, and the movie has a sense of humor because they have a sense of humor.
Totally. Before we wrap, I wanted to ask you if the film has been shown in Mexico. What do you expect the response to be there, and has it been shown already at Mexican festivals? I wonder what people that can identify with that reality much closer will think of it.
It hasn't yet. So our opening in Mexico will be Morelia Film Festival, which is like the main festival in Mexico now, and we've only done little screenings to the Academy members, okay, and to people working in NGOs to do with public policy and all of that. And the response has been very, very interesting. I think it's gonna, I mean, we just wanted it to be a conversation starter, and from what we've sensed from these little screenings, I think it's gonna be just that, I hope.
What did Montoya and Teresa think of the film?
They were, so I played it for them when we were cutting it, and their first reaction was like shock, and they were like, their first reaction was like, no, we can't do this. No, come on, Alonso, let's not do this, please. They were kind of, their first reaction was to, back away. It was too much for them. It was overwhelming, I think. And then we saw it again and again, and we talked about it, and, they were scared of having consequences from their superiors, obviously, and we always understood that. So we were very careful in the edit, in like not naming names, and we always had a team of lawyers that accompanied them and us, and we were together with them through the whole process. So now they're really proud of the movie, and they came to San Sebastian to screen it in public with us, and yeah, it was very moving to be with them, to see it. And sadly, they're not in the police force anymore. They've quit. Before, it didn't have anything to do with the movie. They quit before we finished it. But yeah, I think it's their lives up there, and I'm very grateful to them for sharing it with me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alonso, for being here with us today, and thank you to Film Independent for the screening and conversation. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thank you, Carlos. Gracias.